My name is Kian Ramani, and on November 12th, I died on a strip of two-lane road that runs like a loose thread across the desert outside Yazd. The afternoon had cooled into that thin blue light the desert keeps for itself after the sun steps away, and the wind had begun its evening habit of combing the sand until the air itself seemed to hiss. I was riding my uncle's clattering motorbike, the one that rattled at certain speeds like it was laughing at me, and I was thinking of ordinary things. Whether my mother had remembered to soak the rice, whether the clutch would behave, whether the prayers I mumble without thinking count for anything in the ledger of a life. There was no instruction from heaven, no chorus, just the road, the hum of the chain, the smell of dust and gasoline, and the feeling of being a small moving fact in a large, uncaring landscape. I've replayed the moment 1,000 times, trying to catch the instant before the world changed. Sometimes I tell myself I saw the shard of metal near the shoulder, a gray snake lying quiet in the twilight. Sometimes I tell myself the tire found a stone and the stone shrugged. What I know is that the front wheel jolted with a pop I felt in my teeth. The bike yawed left, the road tipped up as if to look me in the eye, and then I was a scatter of limbs and denim and noise. People ask if it hurt. Pain belongs to the body, and in the first seconds I wasn't wearing mine. I tasted iron. I felt the textured kiss of asphalt on my cheek like a brand. And then I was somewhere, just above and to the side of my own life, as if the horizon had reached down and lifted me by the shoulders to show me the scene. The truck that had been a distant cone of light a moment before was suddenly close and hard and braking. The driver's face wore the expression men wear when they see their own fear reflected back at them. He knelt and put 2 fingers to my neck, searching for the switch we all pretend we can control. His lips moved, and the words were the first ones my mother taught me to shape. The opening of the Fatiha, each phrase unwinding like a rope tossed toward a man in a river. The sound didn't pull me down. It opened something up. The air around me thinned as if the skin of the world had been stretched too tight and finally tore. And through the tear came not a beam, but a presence, not heat or glare, but a kind of knowing that made everything familiar, small and bright, the way a toy looks when you return to it as an adult. I did not walk toward the light because there was no distance to cross. The light gathered me like water finds and fills the hollow it was made for. Fear tried to follow and had no handhold. I understood more than I perceived. I was not erased, I was revealed to myself. And then he stood before me, Isa, Jesus, without arriving, because arrival is a word for people who live inside clocks. He said my name as if he had been saving it from a flood, and my whole life collapsed into that syllable and then unfolded again, clean and warm and unhiding. The first thing I noticed was not his face, but the way his presence silenced the part of me that always feels the need to pretend. He did not interrogate or accuse. He did not ask me to perform my best self. He looked at me with eyes that held grief and humor and a kind of fierce patience. And in that gaze, I experienced relief like a physical thing. I wanted to speak, but words felt clumsy next to the clarity of being known. He turned me, without movement, toward a view of the world that had the depth of an ocean and the precision of a map. Cities glowed like coals nestled in velvet. Rivers ran like handwriting. The seam of a coastline curved as familiarly as a wrist. Then a new dimension bled through the color, something like heat under glass. Patches of red appeared, faint and then undeniable, shifting and pulsing the way a bruise spreads. They weren't borders. They weren't flags. They were concentrations of pressure, long-built tensions exhaling in invisible waves. In the quiet between us, I heard the low, sustained hum of anxiety that doesn't sleep, and farther off I sensed a roar that was not yet sound, but would be a rumor in the throat of a machine. Out on a black sheet of water, the horizon performed a counterfeit sunrise. It was brief and violent and wrong. The sea lifted its shoulders as if shrugging off a blow. Along the curve of a shore, lights died as if a single hand pinched a wire. I flinched the way a person flinches before pain arrives. He did not look away from the damage. He looked at me. "You are seeing the end of a path," he said, and the way he said end made me feel the weight of every step that had come before it. The careless words, the cultivated hatred, the love of being right more than being kind that grows like mold in the corners of a heart and calls itself conviction. I thought I would ask for a name, a date, a coordinate I could carry like a talisman or wield like proof. Those questions stood up inside me, saluting, eager to be sent into battle. He placed his palm against my chest where my breath should have been thunder and was instead peace. Control will not save you, he said, and the sentence went down into me like a stake. Dates will not heal you. What I give you is a commission. Warn as many as will listen, not with theatrics, with tenderness, not with panic, with mercy that tells the truth and stays to help with the dishes after. Tell them to turn while there is time. Tell them to pull hatred out of their mouths like wires from a bomb. Tell them to pray for those they blame. Tell them to practice peace in rooms so small no camera bothers to visit, because those rooms lay the rails the future runs on. The vision shifted, and instead of nations, I saw rooms. It felt like sinking into the earth until I reached the level where decisions are made in ordinary language. A kitchen table held the weight of plates and the heavier weight of a stubborn silence. A father put his hand out, palm up, in a gesture that contained apology without naming it. The son stared at the hand like it was a foreign country, then reached and the air changed. That simple. In a living room, the flicker of a television painted a young woman's face with blue light while her thumb hovered over a share button. She set the phone down and stood, walked the quiet hallway, and knocked on her neighbor's door with a kettle and 2 cups. A small congregation sat in plastic chairs, and a man with a microphone felt the intoxicating urge to turn righteous anger into a performance. He swallowed the urge and confessed that he loved the sound of his certainty more than he loved the people in front of him. Nothing dramatic happened, and everything important did. The temperature dropped. A fire that had been promised refused to catch. I understood, not as an opinion, but as recognition that the blast out at sea was not an isolated catastrophe, but the last sentence in a paragraph we write together every day, with our speech and our contempt and our cowardice and our small courage. War grows first in the mouth. It germinates in jokes that reduce enemies to caricatures, in slogans that flatten faces into teams, in the gritty pleasure of winning an argument on a screen. It ripens in the refusal to climb down when you know you're wrong because you'd rather be admired than real. It hardens into policy because it learned how to survive for years in kitchens. Peace is equally patient. It starts with awkward apologies. It grows in the space you make for someone else's voice. It learns to keep a kettle ready. It looks like a refusal to light a match in a dry field, even when the crowd is chanting for fire. All of this pressed through me with the force of recognition, and I wanted to stay in that clarity the way a man wants to keep a perfectly balanced moment from tipping. He must have seen that longing sit up inside me. "You will return," he said. The words were both instruction and kindness. I felt sorrow move through me like a tide, not for what I was being sent back to, but for what I would leave. He leaned toward me the way a father does when he wants to speak above the wind. "When you carry this, do not make it a sword. Do not make it a brand. Speak it like bread. Break it small. Feed many. Sound hit first when the world came back. Siren. Shouted numbers. The slap of gloved hands against a chest that belonged to me again and hated the attention. Pain followed like a second wave. The inside of my skull felt like a bell that had been struck too hard. The ambulance door closed with the punctuation of a heavy sentence. The ceiling light did not blink. Breath arrived like a friend who had been late and then sprinted. I grabbed the sleeve of the man above me without deciding to and said the only word I had managed to rescue from the other side. Peace. He flinched, and then he smiled through tears that had cut a clean track down his dusty face, and he whispered a prayer into my collar that smelled like pepper and sweat. Hospitals know how to make time elastic. Minutes stretch until they hum like wires and then snap into hours without warning. I woke in chapters, fluorescent glare, the weight of a blanket on my shins, the squeak of a cart outside the door, my mother's hand in my hair as if she could coax me to stay put by smoothing what she could reach. My father stood at the foot of the bed holding his phone like a shield and pretending to scroll until he forgot to pretend and just stared. When I realized I could move my mouth in a way that made sense, I told them what I had seen. I told them without garnish, because anything added would only be theft. My mother pressed her fingertips to her lips and said Issa's name like it had been washed. My father sat in the visitor's chair with the shock of a man who realizes that explaining is not going to help, and he sighed a long sigh. I'd only heard once before, the day my grandfather's body became a memory. Home was the same and not the same. The apartment smelled like lentils and cumin and the lemon oil my aunt rubs into every wooden surface like a benediction. The alley outside was still lined with scooters and 2 cats who have never learned to share. Our neighbor still played the radio too loud when he cooked, like the recipes required the accompaniment. My bed felt too soft for the weight I brought back with me, and too hard for the ache the paddles had left. Sleep came in pieces. Each time I closed my eyes, I returned to the counterfeit dawn flaming over a black sea. It did not hold me the way it had in the vision. It visited. Each time it visited, it brought the smaller scenes with it like an antidote, and I realized the warning and the tenderness were the same sentence spoken in two dialects. Turn away from hatred while there is time. Turn toward each other while there is breath. The morning after I could stand without feeling the floor tilt, I walked slowly to the mosque because I did not know how to carry this without offering it to someone who has carried hard things longer than I have been alive. Our imam greeted me with the tired smile of a man who spends his days listening to people speak in circles until they stumble onto the true center without meaning to. I expected suspicion, a polite theological fencing match where both of us would try not to cut each other. Instead, he poured tea and held it out with hands that shook a little and told me to take my time. I did. I told him about the road and the light and the hand on my chest that stilled my hunger for control. I told him about the rooms, the kettle, the hand offered palm up, the confession in a plastic chair. I told him about Isa saying my name as if he was returning it to me cleaner than I had given it away. The imam didn't argue with the shape of my story. He put his palm flat against his chest and said that God is not poor in his methods and that true warnings leave humility in their wake. He said if the message is from heaven, it will make me love my enemies more than my opinions. He told me to go home and wash the dishes for my mother and then to apologize to the neighbor whose joke about our family I have been resenting like a hobby. He said, men who try to carry revelation on an empty stomach end up carrying only themselves. I laughed because the advice sounded so ordinary. He smiled because ordinary is the doorway most miracles use. Not everything went as cleanly as the story you tell later makes it sound. The first time I explained what I'd seen to my cousins, I felt the old itch to be impressive. They leaned forward with the hunger you see in people who want to belong to a secret. Part of me wanted to give them a map and a date and the thrill of being insiders. Twice I felt a lie form in the back of my throat dressed like a helpful detail. Twice I swallowed hard enough to make my eyes water. I told them I had a commission, not coordinates. One of them laughed harshly the way men laugh when they're afraid and do not know the word for it. Another put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed like he'd found a rung. After they left, I sat alone and apologized to the God who had put a gift in my mouth for the part of me that had wanted to pawn it for applause. I took tea to the neighbor because obedience feels less like work when it arrives in a cup. He opened his door a crack and peered out like a man in a siege. I told him I was sorry for letting a careless sentence grow into a cold hallway between us. He blinked, then looked at the tea the way a stray dog studies a hand. He opened the door wide enough for two people to be people, and we sat in a room that smelled like mothballs and nostalgia, while he showed me an album full of faces who would never stand in that doorway again. We did not argue. We did not solve a policy. When we left, his curtains were open a finger's width wider, and I felt like I had pried up a nail in the floorboards of a future I do not control. My phone turned into a small and dangerous pulpit. Messages came from people I don't know, asking me to confirm their nightmares or to bless their certainty. Some offered me an audience if I would sharpen the story into a spear. A friend from school sent a link dripping with fear dressed as expertise and asked me to endorse it, to give it the light of what I had seen. I typed and then deleted more sentences than I can count because I could feel how easily this warning could become an excuse to inflame the very thing it was given to heal. I told him I will not be the man who helps hatred dress like vigilance. He sent me a one-word reply that cut in a way only small words can. Coward. I set the phone face down and swept the courtyard because my imam had said peace likes clean ground. There are moments when I feel like a contradictory person, a Muslim who met Jesus, a young man who died and came back with a message that refuses to make anyone a villain you can defeat without repenting. In those moments, I remember the hand on my chest and the instruction to speak like bread. Bread isn't exciting. It keeps people alive. Bread isn't a thesis. It's something you can break and share. At dinner, when the radio from downstairs starts chewing the room into sharp pieces with an angry talk show, I turn the volume down and pass the bread, and we practice not mistaking volume for honesty. I don't claim to know how events will unfold. I know what I saw. I know the counterfeit sunrise and the long darkness that follows. I know the way a nation can be led into inevitability one headline at a time. I also know the way small acts shift the direction of a family by a degree, and how degrees compounded become distances that wars cannot cross. I have lived long enough to see how a harsh sentence spoken at breakfast can make an entire day brittle. I have died long enough to see how a gentle sentence can make a house into a refuge when the sirens sing. It has become impossible for me to call any kindness small. Sometimes, late, when the neighborhood is quiet except for the two cats negotiating the border of a trash bin, I stand in the doorway and feel the night press its ear to my chest. I say out loud the names of people I have trouble liking, as if speaking them in the dark can teach my mouth to carry them without teeth. I whisper a blessing over the buildings that look like sleeping ships and over the men who will wake before dawn to knead dough. I pray for leaders I will never meet and for their children who do not get to choose the size of their shadows. I ask God to make me difficult soil for war, the kind that refuses to nourish the roots of contempt. Then I lock the door because love does not mean forgetting to be careful, and I sleep because I have been taught that rest is not a sin but a strategy. If you had found me a year ago and told me I would speak the name of Isa with tenderness and not with argument, I would have smiled the suspicious smile I save for salesmen and said something clever. What I have now will not impress a clever man. It is too simple for that. I was met by mercy. I was given a warning that tastes like grief and hope at once, and I was told to carry it without making weapons from it. So I will keep boiling water. I will keep opening doors. I will keep refusing to be a volunteer in a war that loves to recruit the bored and the bruised. I will keep my tongue on a short leash because I have seen what happens when words roam free and come back with blood on their muzzles. There are days when I feel alone inside all this, like a man who has been given a map that shows the secret roads under a city and can no longer pretend the surface is all that exists. Then something ordinary happens. A child waves at a bus driver who waves back, or my mother laughs the laugh that makes her look like her own mother, or a mechanic wipes his hands and calls me brother, or a vendor slips an extra orange into a paper bag. And I feel the weight shift. The future is not an avalanche. It is a million small stones that can be moved if enough hands decide they are tired of waiting for the mountain to climb down by itself. I have written all of this with the care of a man who knows words can be flint. I have tried to keep them from striking in the wrong places. If they spark, I hope it is only because cold rooms need warmth and not because dry fields want fire. I am learning, slowly, to trust that the God who met me on a road no one owns knows how to use clumsy men for gentle work. And I am learning that the work is always nearer than I think. On the plate in front of me, on the tongue behind my teeth, on the stoop outside my door where a neighbor waits for someone to treat him like he is more than the sum of his opinions. That night, after the house settled and the old pipe stopped ticking, I stood at the window and looked at the dark like a man reading a familiar book. I did not look for omens. I listened for the small, steady promise buried in the ordinary sounds of a city sleeping. Somewhere a kettle whistled and then quieted. Somewhere a couple stopped mid-argument and let silence do the work that pride could not. Somewhere a child rolled over and found his mother's hand. I put my forehead against the cool glass and whispered the name that brought me back. Isa. Not to prove anything, to remember. My mother found me at the window before dawn. Forehead against the cool glass, whispering a name the house had not heard from my mouth before. She didn't ask questions. She put a blanket around my shoulders and left me to the quiet like she was leaving a candle to do its small work. When the sky began to melt from ink to milk, I spoke the sentence I have learned to say before I let news or weather or anyone else tell me who I am for the day. Not today, not through me. The words are not magic. They are a gate I choose to close. The city wakes like a reluctant child, one eyelid at a time. Metal shutters clatter up. Bread ovens exhale a sigh you can smell. I walked to the corner for warm flatbread because it seemed like a sane first act. The baker, with hands the color of the crust, knew my name, knew the story of the accident, and handed me an extra loaf the way men pass blessings without sounding sentimental. On the way back, a scooter and a car tried to occupy the same narrow space, and then two men tried to do the same inside a smaller space called pride. I watched the argument lift off the street and take to the air like a flock of angry birds. The sentence arrived in my chest. Not today, not through me. I stepped toward them without a plan and said what I would want someone to say to me if my temper had made me taller than wisdom. I told them I was grateful they were both alive enough to be this loud at each other, and I asked if I could buy both of them a piece of bread because my hands were full and I needed help carrying. They stared at me as if I had spoken a dialect no one teaches in school. One of them snorted, which is the sound a man makes when grace embarrasses him. The other grinned in spite of himself. We walked to the stall and stood shoulder to shoulder while the baker slid bread from the tile walls. 10 minutes later, they still disagreed about right of way. They did it softer, and softer is the doorway through which sense sometimes enters. People had begun to send me messages late at night and before dawn, as if truth passes through our windows most willingly at the fragile edges of the day. Some wanted a date and a culprit, something neat that could be folded into a story they already liked. Some wanted to shout at me for saying the name I said. One message was short and kind and felt like a hand on my shoulder. Thank you for reminding me to boil water. I read that one twice. Then I made tea and took 2 cups upstairs to the neighbor whose radio had been chewing the hallway into sharp little pieces every evening. He opened the door wearing a look that expected a complaint. I told him I had made too much tea. He held the cup like it was a complicated device, then smiled the way a child smiles when he is told he can stay up past bedtime. Word traveled through family and then farther, the way a rumor travels when it meets a container that refuses to hold venom. A cousin asked me to speak at a small gathering he helps host in a room above a shop. I told him I don't preach. He said, "Good, people are tired of being preached at." When I arrived, a dozen faces waited in mismatched chairs. The room smelled like varnish and dust and a lingering clove cigarette from someone's nerves. I told the story the same way I told my mother, without garnish, and when I reached the part where I wanted to offer a map and a date and didn't, a boy near the window exhaled like he had been holding his breath on purpose. When I finished, no one applauded. A woman asked what she should do with a brother who thrives on starting arguments and refuses to end them. I told her what I tell myself. Choose the smallest faithful thing that humiliates your pride and nourishes your love. Then do it again tomorrow. Let him be loud if he needs to. Make your house a place where volume cannot win. A man lingered after everyone left, the kind of lingering that means he is not sure if he's allowed to speak. He told me he had not spoken to his father in 5 years because of one night and one sentence neither of them can forget. He asked if I thought God would hold it against him if he didn't make the first move. He was asking for permission to stay safe. I wanted to give it to him because safety is delicious. I said the harder thing. I told him I couldn't climb into his skin, but I could tell him what I saw. Peace grows in rooms where someone sets down the need to be first in the way people set down heavy bags after walking too far. He nodded and looked at the floor and left. 2 days later, he sent a voice message full of static and relief. He had gone and knocked. His father opened the door without words. They sat in the same room pretending the television required their attention. Halfway through a commercial, the father asked if he was hungry. He said yes. They ate stale cookies. Not a miracle by most standards. By mine, the kind of miracle the world is built from. The driver who knelt on the road and called me back by the skin of my neck found me through a cousin's friend who knew the mechanic who had fixed his truck. He came to our apartment wearing a clean shirt he didn't seem comfortable in and holding a bag of oranges like an offering. He stood awkwardly in our doorway until my mother said his name, the way people say grace, and then he relaxed into a chair as if he had been permitted to sit on the edge of an ocean and put his feet in. He told me he had never been good at prayers and that when he saw my body, he didn't know what to do except say the first holy words he ever learned and shout at God to do the part only God can do. He laughed, embarrassed by his own honesty. He told me he is Armenian and that his mother still keeps an icon near the kitchen the way other mothers keep aprons. I said the name I say and his eyes filled. We sat for a long time without trying to convince each other of anything. He asked if he could hug me before he left. He did. He smelled like soap and diesel and oranges and the inside of an ambulance. Not everything that followed was noble. An old friend messaged me with a plan to turn the story into a series of posts that would make us both look like brave men with secret knowledge. He used the words strategy and platform. I used the words no and please forgive me if you think I'm wasting an opportunity. He left the conversation with the brittle silence of someone who wanted to be obeyed. I lay awake that night, haunted by the ghost of my own ambition, the version of me that loves being listened to more than being faithful. I whispered the sentence into the dark. Not today, not through me. I slept and dreamed nothing but breathing. There is a woman who runs a small clinic 3 alleys from us where the paint chips and the walls are hung with signs that make up in sincerity what they lack in artistry. I asked if I could sweep floors and carry water because sometimes the only cure for too many words is labor. She put me to work in the back where the light falls through a high window like a blessing on the wrong part of the day. I learned how to smile at men who think smiling is an accusation, how to speak 2 sentences to a mother who has been waiting too long with a feverish child, how to take the trash out quietly so it does not add any weight to a room already heavy. In the afternoons, the doctor, who looks too young for his work, would sit for 2 minutes and drink tea hot enough to remind him he is alive. He told me the clinic is a place where people forget to be enemies because illness turns everyone into the same kind of vulnerable. I asked him if he thought that could be taught without fevers and broken bones. He shrugged and said, "Pain has a way of telling the truth louder than we can." Our imam asked if I would come to a gathering where several leaders would be present, not to make a speech, but to tell the simple story and then leave before men started asking me to make predictions. The room was full of men who are used to being the loudest voice in whatever room they occupy. I told the story and then said, "Thank you," and stood. A few tried to pin me with questions shaped like respect and sharpened like hooks. I smiled with what I hoped looked like gratitude and made my way toward the door. A man followed me into the hallway, a pastor from a small church who looked like he carries 3 jobs and 5 griefs. He said the people in his congregation are exhausted from bracing themselves against the world and asked if the message could be shortened into something he could hand out between the hymn and the benediction. I told him what I say every morning. Not today, not through me. He laughed in a way that sounded like a cough and said he might put it on his own refrigerator. There was a night that scared me. 2 men on our block, both kind in their own ways and cruel in different ones, had been grinding at each other for months over politics and pride and the inheritance neither wanted to share. It reached a pitch that made the alley itself feel like a wire drawn too tight. Voices rose like heat. A small crowd gathered as crowds do when they smell heat and want to feel a little of it on their faces. My father stepped into the alley and stood between them with the body of a man who has known real fear and therefore is not impressed by pretend versions. He raised both hands in a gesture I have seen on old posters and in my own memory on a different kind of road. He did not lecture. He said one sentence that I had not heard from his mouth before. "We are not giving them our future tonight." The word sat down on the air like a heavy thing. The men blinked as if a light had shifted in the room. A minute later, everyone was embarrassed enough to go home. I asked my father where the sentence had come from. He told me about a night years ago when a siren had become a scream and friends had not come home and a boy he once was made a promise to the man he hoped to become. I had not known this story. He had not known he was permitted to speak it. We stood in the alley a long time after the crowd melted, feeling a thread that had been tight for decades, loosened by a finger's width. Because I am a son and therefore sometimes foolish, I posted about it. I didn't use names. I spoke the truth in a cavalier way that made it look like I was a hero in a story with no other characters. The next morning, my uncle sent a message with no punctuation, which is how I can tell he is speaking with his whole feeling. He said that language can be a thief when it doesn't ask permission before it carries the private into public. He was right. I walked to my father's room with my head low and asked for forgiveness for turning his sentence into content. He looked at me for a long time, and then the corner of his mouth moved the way it moves when he is proud and trying not to let pride spoil the moment. He said the story is ours, not mine, and the world is full of men trying to steal things without noticing the weight. He forgave me. I deleted the post and sat with the humiliation until it tasted less like poison and more like medicine. The story has taken me into rooms I never expected to enter and rooms I had forgotten how to respect. A teacher from my school invited me to speak to a group of older students who spend more time arguing online than doing their homework. I wore a shirt my mother likes and told them the story quickly because attention is a skittish animal and flees at the first crunch of arrogance underfoot. I told them I'm not asking them to be nice. Niceness is a fragile thing that shatters at the first raised voice. I told them I'm asking them to be courageous in a way that makes their throats tight, to apologize first, to refuse the adrenaline rush of humiliation as entertainment, to find the kid they haven't talked to since he made one mistake in 7th grade and sit with him at lunch like, the world is not a courtroom but a house with chairs. A girl in the back row with ink on her fingers and a look that has already seen too much raised her hand and asked how to do that without letting dangerous people near your bones. I told her love has locks. Boundaries are doors, not walls. She nodded and wrote something on her palm, and I felt a kind of hope close by. A journalist messaged me asking for a clear statement, tying what I saw to something that would make for a sharp headline. I wrote 3 drafts that sounded brave and then deleted them because bravery that isn't honest is a costume, and costumes catch fire. I told him I didn't have what he wanted. He replied with a long thread about responsibility and reach and the urgency of the times. He wasn't wrong. He may also have been wrong. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my shoes like they could explain this better than I can. Then I went downstairs and cut fruit for my mother because faithful is bigger than famous. I am asked sometimes if the light has visited me again, if dreams come like telegrams, or if voices slip through vents. The truth is simpler and less cinematic. I haven't seen what I saw that day since that day. I don't chase the extraordinary because I am afraid I will start counterfeiting it the way a man counterfeits coins when he cannot bear to be ordinary. What I have is an ordinary instruction I have to choose every morning until it becomes muscle memory. Not today, not through me. I say it when I open the news. I say it when I feel the hook of outrage tugging my mouth open. I say it before I knock on a door. I say it before I write a sentence. I say it when I am tired and most likely to fail. I was given a commission by a presence whose absence has not made him less real. Warn as many as will listen. I have learned that warning is not always loud. Sometimes it is a quiet refusal. Sometimes it is a hand held out palm up. Sometimes it is a kettle whistling. Sometimes it is a deleted comment. Sometimes it is a boy and his father choosing to be awkward rather than triumphant. Sometimes it is a son wiping the table for his mother without being asked. A world is saved in the same small units that a world is lost. I have seen the end of a path. I am asking you to help me make a new path out of the rooms you already live in. If you have listened to me this far, you are the kind of person who wants to act, not just be entertained by warnings. I am asking you to make a promise out loud so your mouth learns a new habit. Type these words where I can see them, and so can the quiet ones reading in the back rows. I choose to be difficult soil for war. Put that sentence in the comments and add the name of your city so I can pray over it when the house is dark and the cats are arguing with the trash bins. Tap the like button so this warning reaches the next person who is one careless sentence away from lighting a dry field. Subscribe so you can walk with me as I keep choosing this small way of peace and keep telling the story like bread. Broken, shared, never sharpened into a blade. And if you do nothing else after hearing me, whisper with me when morning comes and the world starts tugging at your sleeves. Not today, not through me.